much for joining us this morning. I am honored to be moderating this panel of fantastic panelists to discuss technological innovations and security. I understand that the theme of this conference this year is reinvent, innovate, and leapfrog, which is very apropos for the conversation that we're going to have this morning. As we all know, the past 3 years of conflict from Russia's illegal invasion in Ukraine, and even before that, starting in 2014, we have seen the emergence of technology on the battlefield happen at such a rapid rate that we are trying to distill the lessons learned from what is happening on the battlefield in Ukraine quickly, efficiently, and effectively. And we are so thrilled to be joined by the panelists this morning and Minister Fedorov from Ukraine. Sir, thank you so much for joining us as well. So what we'll do is, I think we're going to turn it over to the Vice Prime Minister for Innovations, Development of Education, Science, and Technology, Mykhailo Fedorov, for some opening comments, and then we will go down the line of panelists, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. Minister, over to you.
Hello. I believe that everything is okay with the translation.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, super.
Yes, we can
Sorry,
hear you.
I will use translation. If you could use your device, special device for translation, I change my language. Oh. Yeah? Okay? Супер.
Yes, there is translation.
Якщо можна, я вас не чую, якщо що, але я впевнений, що ви мене чуєте, да, по вашій реакції. І якщо можна, я буду говорити українською. Я дякую за запрошення на сьогоднішню панель щодо інновацій, тому що дійсно зараз Україна... А ви мене чуєте переклад, точно? Може, точно з перекладом всіх? Все, супер, дякую. Дякую за запрошення на панель. Дуже важливо говорити зараз про інновації, про розвиток технологій, які відбуваються в Україні, в нашій країні, на полі бою. Я перш за все хотів би подякувати за підтримку, яку Сполучені Штати надають нашій країні під час повномасштабної війни. Для нас це критично, і ви бачите, що війна сьогодні досить технологічна. Ви бачите те, що відбувається сьогодні на полі бою, відбувається використання технологій. Сьогодні, по суті, відбувається на полі бою в Україні, і ми активно використовуємо технології. Було тільки 7 компаній, які виготовляють дрони, і з котрих, чесно говоря, тільки 4 компанії виготовляли дрони, які могли літати під російським ребом. То на сьогоднішній момент в Україні вже функціонує приблизно 500 компаній. Це, напевно, найбільша кількість компаній взагалі в світі. І за цей час, за кілька років, ми пройшли з точки побудови інституцій і стимулювання, як зробити так, щоб в країні почали з'являтися технології в цьому напрямку, певну кількість кроків. І цю ситуацію ми по факту змоделювали, розвиваючи певні інституції. Наприклад, в Україні ми зараз створили одні з найкращих податкових умов для технологічних компаній, які займаються війною, для дефенс-компаній. Ми зробили одну з найбільших маржинальностей, тобто можливості для заробітку для компаній, які займаються технологіями. Ми нашу роль переосмислили і по факту стали венчурним інвестором для нашого ринку. Тобто ми роздаємо гранти через фонд інновацій і стимулюємо розвиток стартапів, видаючи ці безповоротні гранти. Ми прибрали багато мит і податків і дозвільних документів на комплектуючі для БПЛА. Тобто ця свобода, вона призвела до того, що і конкуренція призвела до того, що у нас велика кількість технологічних компаній, які конкурують між собою і зупиняти ворога. І проходимо, і пройшли, точніше, в радіоелектронній боротьбі, в роботизованих технологіях. Ми проходимо зараз для перехоплювачів шахедів, дронів, які літають, в напрямку, не знаю, розвитку дешевих ракет. У нас вже більше ніж 30 компаній, які зараз виробляють стартапів, і вони вже перетворюються більш такі сталі компанії, які виготовляють від невеличких ракет до дронів реактивних, які функціонують як крилаті ракети. Тобто ми бачимо, що під час технологічної війни, створюючи певні інституції, які стимулюють розвиток технологій і роблячи правильні речі, можна зробити неймовірний ринок. І ми вивчили досвід і Першої світової війни, і Другої світової війни. Ми аналізували те, що робили Сполучені Штати під час Другої світової війни. Ми бачили те, як працює DIU в Сполучених Штатах, як працює DARPA. Тобто ми вивчали ваш досвід для того, щоб надихнутися і побудувати в Україні власну екосистему. І ми працюємо з багатьма американськими компаніями. І скажу вам по секрету, що вже є певні кейси співпраці українських компаній і Сполучених Штатів, які стануть геймченджерами в найближчий час на полі бою щодо боротьби там з різними засобами ворога. І це для нас також велика можливість розвитку для нашого людського капіталу і для того, щоб боротися з ворогом. Тому, якщо коротко робити висновки, то ми дуже вдячні за ту допомогу, яку нам надають Сполучені Штати. Ми вивчали досвід і вивчаємо досвід в Сполучених Штатах, як ви стали найбільш технологічною нацією світу, і ми цей досвід беремо і використовуємо в Україні. Ми розділяємо принципи незалежних демократичних інституцій, які можуть розвивати ринок і створюють рівні правила гри для всіх учасників цього ринку. Ми використовуємо грантові програми, хакатони для того, щоб шукати людський капітал, який може генерувати ці стартапи. І ми продовжуємо створювати умови для бізнесу від податкових, від спрощення бюрократії, дозвільних процедур, для того, щоб розвивати наших виробників конкуренції. І мій головний меседж, напевно, ще один головний меседж, це в тому, що на сьогодні Україна найкращий майданчик в світі для того, щоб можна було протестувати технології, воєнні технології, які потім стануть технологіями подвійного призначення. І ми найкраща можливість для того, щоб розвивати дефенс-тек Сполучених Штатів. І цю юнітів, які на полі бою тестують технології, у нас є, ми готові відкривати доступ до наших компаній, стартапів, які зараз тестуються, для того, щоб інвестували в ці компанії. Тому ми готові до цієї співпраці з неймовірною вдячністю до вас.
If I may ask one follow-up question to you, discussing Brave One and all of the work that this platform has done in collaboration, I know you mentioned some other technologies that you all are pursuing as priorities. Obviously drones, you mentioned missiles. Can you tell us a little bit more about other priority areas that you're looking to explore with this platform moving forward? But what I'd like to do is move on, because I think he teed up us very well for our next panelist here. We have Abigail Desjardins. She is the Deputy Director for Global Partnerships at the Defense Innovation Unit as part of DoD. Thank you so much for being here this morning. You heard the Vice Prime Minister discuss collaboration with the U.S. You heard, taking the lessons learned from previous conflicts that the U.S. has been in terms of emerging technology, how to do this faster, quicker, and more effectively. In your role at DIU, can you tell us how you all are looking at the lessons learned coming out of the battlefield in Ukraine? Has that changed DIU's priorities at all in terms of what you think the warfighter is going to need in the future? And any thoughts you have about, working with the Ukrainians as well as we explore these new technologies?
Sure. Are you able to hear me, or should I use the microphone? Okay. All right. Hopefully you can hear me now. Thank you all for the opportunity to be here today. I'm honored to be here. Yes, thank you very much for the question. For those of you unfamiliar with the U.S. Department of Defense Innovation Unit, yes, we are a part of the Department of Defense here in the United States. We have been around since 2015, where we were established to recreate the connection between the Department of the Defense and the startup innovation ecosystem. Since 2015, we have gone through a few evolutions. The world events have obviously informed and influenced our strategic direction, what our priorities are, what we want to work on. We are currently in our DIU 3.0 phase, which is focused on leveraging the tools that we are predominantly using to access commercial technology, modify it for defense applications, and then move to rapidly field and scale those capabilities. We have intentionally placed individuals in strategic locations, such as embedding a DIU person within Strategic Assistance Group Ukraine. We have folks embedded within EUCOM, all intentionally put there to derive the valuable lessons learned from the actual war that is occurring, so that we can better inform the strategic priorities predominantly for our autonomy portfolio. So our autonomy portfolio focused on the Blue UAS program, drone manufacturing, and the like, most definitely has taken some of the lessons learned and have actually put a couple of Ukrainian companies on contract. So we are constantly looking to see ways that we can better leverage the invaluable lessons that are being learned, while also simultaneously looking to see what regulatory changes need to be put in place to allow DIU to put some of our prototype companies and capabilities in the hands of our partners for actual field testing in an actual real environment. So we are, as I mentioned, looking to see what regulatory changes we might be able to push forward to enable that to happen.
So if I can ask a quick follow-up before we go to our next panelist, the one of the theme words for this year's conference is leapfrog. So, you mentioned the regulatory policies and the regulatory issues. In your time at DIU, have you seen that process streamlined where we're working with partners in a more efficient way, lessons that, potentially could be coming from Ukraine or applied to our partnership with Ukraine?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So the focus on global partnerships for DIU is relatively new. So it's been about the last 18 months or so. That said, the contracting process that we use has been open to foreign owned companies since 2015. So we have always worked with foreign owned companies. The effort that we are engaging in right now within global partnerships is to do that intentional outreach and engagement with the various ministries of defense within our closest partners and allies to do a couple of things. One, it's to help them establish a strong DIU-like organization if they so choose, so that we can help them understand the lessons that we have learned, while also helping them navigate what the application of engaging with the commercial, to include academic and the investment communities, means for their defense ecosystem, while also learning valuable lessons from their own experiences of engaging with the commercial sector. Twofold, we are trying to ensure that the global market understands that they can apply for DIU solicitations. So we're making sure that we are pushing out all of that information in our engagements. And then thirdly, as we are working with our partners, we are doing so intentionally to work on identifying where there are common capability needs, so that as we are putting out our solicitations to industry, they are reflective not just of the Defense Department needs, but also of our partner needs. And that is to help ensure that industry is aware that the capabilities they are developing are designed to be maximally interoperable, so that we can ensure that we have capabilities at point of need, that our partners are able to quickly pick up and use the capabilities that we are potentially funding and fielding. So we are looking to grow and to strengthen and to scale our relationships with our partners and allies, but what we are seeing right now is very promising.
Thank you so much, Abigail. That's we could talk about this. I'm sure we will continue to talk about this on how the government is prioritizing some of these things. And you, again, teed me up very well to introduce Debra Cagan, Senior Advisor for the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council, with many years at the Department of Defense, working with all sorts of partners and allies over time. Debra, if I can turn to you and ask, as you look at the landscape in Ukraine, as you look at the partnership environment, what do you think the U.S. and maybe the Western industrial base, Western governments, the U.S. in particular, what should we be focused on right now with our partnership with Ukraine moving forward?
Hi, so forgive my little bit of laryngitis here. First, I want to say thank you very much. And yes, what Abigail said, what the minister said, it's all very interesting and compelling. Because I have a tendency to throw the occasional smoke bomb, I'm going to do that here today. First of all, there are tactical errors and then there are strategic blunders. And the approach taken by the Trump administration in forcing some semblance of a peace agreement on Ukraine falls into the strategic blunder territory. And I say this because it is very short-sighted and fails to recognize the reality of the types of cooperation with Ukraine that could be critical for the success of the U.S. military against the pacing threats from China and Russia. And again, you've spoken about this a little bit, but I'd like to see that relationship formalize, not just be piecemeal with DIU and other places, because I believe this singular obsessive focus on minerals and giving away illegally annexed territory, it's not looking at the bigger picture, which is that Ukraine has an innovative, burgeoning defense industry, arguably one of the most inventive and successful in the world. Because when you're forced to do things because your existential existence, excuse the dual here, is at stake, you tend to invent and you tend to work at a pace that we don't understand yet in this country, and many of our allies don't understand either. So because, as you said, Abigail, the Department of Defense invested in innovation to increase the readiness and effectiveness of the U.S. military, and you want to do so at a pace that is really often at odds with the tedious legacy and the painfully slow process that takes years from development, testing, production, and deployment. So how do you fix that? Ukraine has turned these legacy models on their collective heads, and partnering formally with Ukrainian innovators would conceivably save the U.S. taxpayer, since this administration is focused on that, hundreds of billions of dollars by circumventing these costly processes. And we're sitting here in Ukraine House, hosted by a country who knows how to do this, who's had to learn how to do this. So instead of sort of kicking them down the road, we should be partnering with them across this broad level, which again would make the U.S. military and those of our allies much more competent, much more efficient, and much better prepared for these new 21st century threats. And the other critical point here, and I'm really glad, again, I'm picking on you, that you mentioned this, is the regulatory process. We should be, like the Danes, like the Estonians, like others, the French, giving weapons that we're looking at to Ukraine to use in the battlefield against this near-peer enemy, not against Syria or Iran or these other people who are semi-competent, or the Houthis. They're not Russia. And so if you can test your weapon systems in the actual battlefield, this gives you an advantage, and it saves you billions of dollars of, so let's face it, testing something at Fort Huachuca is not the same as testing it. I'm really glad the minister mentioned electronic warfare, because I think it's something that we lost sight of because of our focus on air superiority in every conflict. And now we have a different kind of conflict, and we're not as well prepared for it. So this whole EW piece, Ukraine understands the whole countermeasure piece they're looking at. That's what we should be partnering with. And again, that type of massive success that Ukraine has had against Russia is a virtually priceless information for the United States. I've often said that the first two industrial revolutions occurred over 2 centuries. Now we are witnessing an industrial revolution every few months. But in the modern battle space, which is multi-domain, that revolution is happening every 2 to 3 days. And the fact that Ukraine can move at the pace that it's moving to address that, to be that dynamic and changing, with all due respect to my U.S. colleagues who are here today, we're just not very dynamic and flexible at being able to do that. So instead of sort of dismissing Ukraine as this country that we want to end this war with and just move on, we should be embracing formal partnerships, not just through the DIE unit, but formally through the United States of America, through the White House, through the State Department. And this would give an incredible boost and an incredible faster timeline for our military. So I think that this will help us compete better, will help us address the threats that are our focus on the Indo-Pacific. This will help us address this because we're talking near-peer enemies again, and we know Russia and China share a huge amount of technology. Frankly, we'd be fools not to partner with this country instead of making it pay for their apparent sin of survival.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Really appreciate your comments. I think you again have teed up the next panelist so well, and we're going to circle back to the policy issues that you lay out, which are so critically important because everything falls from the policy and the strategy. And I'd like to turn now to Jennifer Pueschner, and I want to make sure I get this correct. Ukraine Executive, Requirements and Capabilities, Global Accounts, Raytheon, and RTX Business. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Jennifer. Deborah mentions, how do we do this in a more formalized way? How do we do this in a more efficient way that both takes into effect the needs of the U.S. as we war plan and operationally plan, the needs of Ukraine as they fight for the defense of their country? Coming from the industry, how are you all prioritizing the rapidity of getting innovation out to the field quickly? How are you balancing this from an industry perspective of, not just the cutting edge and emerging technologies, but the need for conventional platforms and things that we've seen Ukraine need over and over again over the course of this conflict? Would love your thoughts on how you look at the problem set.
Thank you very much. So first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm very honored to be here. You asked several questions, so I'm going to hopefully address them all, but if I don't, please come back at me. So I think, first of all, we need to look at history. I mean, that's one of the things we need to do is to recognize what we've learned. If you look at World War II and you look at the introduction of radar technology that was introduced by our allies, it provided tremendous advantage in terms of targeting, tracking, navigation, early warning, and many historians believe that was far more significant than even the atomic bomb in terms of our ability to win the war. So there's an example, right, of exquisite capability. Alternatively, if you look at Vietnam and you look at what happened with in asymmetric warfare, I mean, we had the technological advantage, but they used guerrilla warfare tactics, they used their knowledge of the terrain and the ability to win against a technologically superior enemy. And so I think it's important that we recognize that technology has its place, but innovation, agility, and the ability to pivot quickly is critical, and we've certainly seen that demonstrated by the Ukrainians. In terms of industry's role, we've been very fortunate in partnership with our U.S. government program offices to get lessons learned. A lot of that is shared with us through INSATU, the NATO Security Assistance Technical Office for Ukraine, as well as the Security Assistance Group Ukraine prior to them. NATO also has capability coalitions, and those have been extremely helpful, working across multiple countries, capturing lessons learned, looking at how we can capitalize on best practices. And then certainly, and lastly, and I consider most importantly, the ability to stay closely in touch with the Ministry of Defense, the Ukraine land forces and air forces. There's nothing that can replace hearing directly from those on the battlefield what they're encountering. And we have the opportunity to learn, what are the challenges, but also what are the opportunities? How do we pivot? And so I think there's an important balance between focusing on, exquisite platforms and having technology that is, attritable, that can pivot quickly. And industry is continuing to do that.
That's great. Thank you. I think there's been a lot of discussion from the industry perspective on the signaling, both from the U.S. government, European partners, and allies about needs over the long term. From your perspective, do you feel that industry is getting the right signals about, what will be needed in the future in terms of capability?
Yes. So I think, in the area of integrated air and missile defense, there's tremendous opportunity. I think first is going to be, really upgrading the current platforms that they've received, really thinking about obsolescence mitigation, thinking about sustainment, maintenance, repair, overhaul for the long term. Currently, the allies and the supporting countries have been providing that, but creating self-sustainment for the country itself is going to be critical. And in order to do that, we need to partner with Ukrainian industry, both state-owned and privately held, to help them understand how to maintain it. I mean, they've actually learned innovative techniques that we can learn from as well. So I think it's critical that, when appropriate, we can get people on the ground, FSRs, to be able to partner with them to work. And long-term, also really understanding what platforms are going to be critical to their deterrence in the future.
No, that's great to hear. I'm glad to hear that all the signals are being met here. And I think that gets back to Debra's earlier point. The more that we're able to formalize and pragmatically put partnerships forward that allow the space to efficiently look at some of these issues moving forward, I think is really, really key. So finally, I'd like to turn back to the Ukrainian perspective. We have Mr. Dmytro Kavun here, please, with us, who is, and I want to make sure I get this correct, is the president of Dignitas Ukraine. Sir, thank you so much for joining us this morning. You have really seen from your work the evolution of the grassroots movement and technology happen in Ukraine over the course of several years. I would love your perspective on what you've seen in terms of that collaboration from a grassroots movement, and how is that working together from an industry and government perspective, that collaboration and cooperation?
Thank you. Thank you for the question, and thank you for having me part of this panel with esteemed other panelists. Very good question. I think grassroots effort has really done a magical job to help Ukraine stand up to Russian aggression. What we have seen, right, more so from history perspective, I like the historical perspective, and I'll get a bit of a different angle at it, is that traditionally war has been, the weapons have been made by the government, because it required a lot of production industry support and whatnot. As we have seen in this previous 3 years, is technology, affordable technology that anybody can implement, can really make a big difference in defense, right? So we're talking about hobby drones, right? An ability for us to see not just past those bushes, but let's say, get your, binoculars on, higher up and be able to see what's happening, the situational awareness in that respect. So I think that has been a very powerful component. And so I'm here with Dignitas Ukraine, which is a nonprofit organization here in the U.S., is also a charity organization in Ukraine. And what we preach is that Ukraine can win with the help of technologies, that Ukraine does not have or does not want to spend the human resources, put their people in the meat grinders like Russia does, right? We want to win smart. And that comes from our ability to mobilize any resources possible, starting from grassroots. Our team has been volunteering for Ukraine since late 2013, beginning 2014, and then, we started Dignitas in 2023 when we realized that we need to focus specifically on technologies. Started with Chinese drones back in 2022 when things were in disarray, but we realized the need for that technology. In 23, we pivoted to FPV drones. And we have seen an immense progress in Ukraine on how that develops. And all of these drones were, I think Mykhailo Fedorov mentioned that in the beginning these were, Chinese components, and there were only a handful of companies when producing, Ukraine-made drones. Now there's hundreds of these companies, and what's more important is that the components, the economy drives the demand drives the supply. So there are now, we're talking about components and supply chain that is being built out in Ukraine. And it's being, there's, I think last month, Ukraine procured the first 1,000 drones in Ukraine from Ukrainian components, right? There are, of course, secondary components that are still necessary that need to be produced in Taiwan as well. But that's a good example of success scenario of what happens when nonprofit organizations like ours, I see ourselves as kickstarting and almost accelerating the businesses, and similar to Brave One, but at a different level, the bottom-up approach of technologies that can work, will work, and the biggest aspect is that, as other panelists have mentioned as well, is that this is all experience that the technological advances has happened that we have never seen before, and Ukraine is willing to share this knowledge with our partners in U.S. and NATO. We just need to take an opportunity to continue building on that and training, because as the technological life cycle changes so quickly, one of our programs is training, and we keep updating training almost every week because the technological changes. The war has kicked off on both sides, unfortunately, of both on Russian and Ukrainian side. It's a game of cat and mouse where one side develops something, the other counterparts, and the cycle keeps on going. So we need to make sure one of the things that we can do better in general is ability to scale, right? In general, governments are, slower than the private sector, right? There are checks and balances that are in place against the corruption, and that's great. But at the time of war, that costs lives every day. So the grassroots efforts help kickstart the technologies, but then the government needs to take on and really scale the development of the right technologies. Unfortunately, we've seen that Russia is fairly effective at that because they're dictatorship. So whatever one person says, the rest of the country more or less does, minus the corruption. But we need to learn from that and make the processes effective for the better, essentially.
Thank you so much for laying that out. A quick follow-up question for you, because as you talk about, and everyone on this panel has mentioned it, the rapid pace of innovation in Ukraine, the absolute, successes on the battlefield in terms of tech matching and overcoming some of those challenges. I would be remiss if I didn't ask what you think the biggest challenges are moving forward. Is it supply chain? Is it pace? Is it scale? And how are those problems being approached?
That's a very good question. I think so scale is certainly important, right? The other important aspect is engineering, right? We need to invest in our human capital and make sure that this innovation keeps going, right? Ukraine has not only smart people who can develop these technologies. I think we've seen that smart people around the world mobilize behind the idea that Ukraine needs to win, and has really propelled the technological innovation in that respect. So we need to make sure that this keeps going, because a lot of these grassroots efforts, they are volunteer-based, which is commendable, right? But how scalable it is to keep going for years and years, let's be honest, Russia is not stopping anytime soon, unless it's, like a bully, fought back. Russia is not stopping. So Ukraine needs to invest more in the engineering aspect of things, to keep the going, as well as continue developing partnership with the country's organizations at any level, right? Grassroots, top-down approaches is very powerful, but then again, that scalability needs to be solidified in order to be more effective in that respect.
Thank you. I think that's a really key point. It's what's the sustainability of a lot of this movement moving forward. You need to be able to be proactive, but also sustain the motion, right? And so we see so many wonderful things coming out of Ukrainian technology for security, technology on the battlefield. How do we capture those, everyone capture those better for the future, I think is a really key element. So I'm going to turn to some general questions for the panel, and I'd love to leave some time for the audience to ask questions as well. So please get thinking about what you'd like to ask our amazing panelists. I see a hand already up, so we'll come to you in a few minutes. But, I really wanted to tack on to this question of lessons learned. I've been doing European policy and defense policy for a long time. The past few years, we've been hearing about all these fantastic lessons coming out of the battlefield in Ukraine, such key elements as partners and allies look how to do this better and how to do the system better. But my understanding is that, again, and I think I've heard this from the panelists today, a lot of this is ad hoc in nature still. There's some formal mechanisms happening, the NATO mechanism for lessons learned and training, obviously key conversations between our partners and being on the ground in Ukraine, et cetera. I'd love the panelists to weigh in on how you feel the lessons learned are being converted into good policy, into good decision making, both from a U.S. perspective, from an industry perspective, from a Ukrainian perspective, because I do feel I've heard very mixed things, I would say personally, about what has been able to be distilled and effective as we look to do all of this better. So maybe, Abigail, I'll start with you.
This is a tricky one for me, recognizing that what I'm about to say does not represent the views of the United States government, but these are my views. I would say it is hard to take lessons learned from an active conflict that is rapidly evolving and translate them into tangible, actionable lessons that can be applied outside of that environment. So, I will just modify the question a little bit in my response, is that at DIU, we have attempted to take a rapid acquisition approach and fight against the bureaucracy to better identify commercially viable technology and move through that co-development and that process of trying to test things at the pace of industry. We have tried that. We are still operating on a 12 to 24 month timeline, which is still slower than industry. And our current model, focused on how do we take very exquisite capabilities that we identify from the commercial technology and how do we scale them, is not met without challenges. I mean, you speak about the engineering and the human capital piece of it. But when we identify a fantastic drone company that's a team of 5 and we tell them, okay, now we're placing a purchase order for 1,000 drones, go do it in 6 months, that's what we need. And they look at us and go, what? Well, we don't have the manufacturing base for that. So you have to make sure that you have the manufacturing base to get at the sustainability piece of it. Otherwise, all we are doing is injecting a heck of a lot of innovation enthusiasm and not building the back end to be able to sustain. I would say one of the things that I am learning is the fantastic innovation ethos culture that resides within the Ukrainian population. I really do hope that when there is peace, that all of that innovation that is being put into defense needs is then very quickly able to be translated into the commercial and the public sector. So I hope that the training that's being put in place is gearing the population for dual fluency, which is something that DIU we care very much about, is ensuring that folks are thinking about the commercial application.
That's great. Thank you so much, Abigail. How do we do that faster? Because, as we've heard, the tech matching on the battlefield is in weeks, not months. How do we do that? Deborah, maybe I'll turn to you. You know, based on your answer to the first question, but hearing the other panelists discuss, you know, how to do this in a more formalized approach for lessons learned. You know, any thoughts on how the U.S. is doing on that, or perhaps what the U.S. could be doing better on that? But you know, overall, the partnership. How do we do that better for our own warfighting capabilities?
You keep throwing me raw meat. You know, in this age of, in this administration of its isolationist tendencies, this is the exact opposite of what you need to get ahead. And what I mean by that is, I'm not trying to be insulting here; it just somehow leaches out. But what I mean by that is, we learned the hard way through multiple wars, multiple conflicts. And this is not the first administration who thought they could go it alone. This was the same attitude I saw after 9/11, until all of a sudden they realized you can't do this in Afghanistan just by yourself. You need allies, you need partners. So it's great to sort of insult your allies and say all you want, but there's no way the United States is going to meet that pacing threat from China without partnering with its allies and friends and integrating Ukraine in that. We just don't have the capacity that we thought we might have. And I think even President Trump realized this when he entered into the agreement with Finland for icebreakers, because the U.S. hasn't built these kind of ships since the 80s. So at some point, you just have to recognize that you don't have every capacity, you don't have every capability, and you're not going to be able to do this without allowing, because as my colleagues here have said, there's so much that only so much Raytheon can do without permission from the government to mix those technologies with someone in Europe, for example. And there's only so much you can do without that permission of being able to reach out in a rapid way, because we're still being guided by non-proliferation policies that were made up in the 90s that have very little relevance in 2025. And when you allow those policies to determine how you partner with other countries, you're going to come out on the losing end. So what I would say is it's time to sort of rethink these export controls from the missile technology control regime that don't make a lot of sense when you're talking to the Nordics or the Baltics or whatever. It's time to rethink how you do this, because we're not going to address that pacing threat by ourselves. And it's important for the future and the future reliability of the U.S. military to keep its position as the best of all, to partner with allies and friends and with Ukraine. And that means fundamentally, and Congress has a role here, of making certain that you have the opportunity to do this, and that it's okay to share technological secrets with your allies. You know, it's okay. You're not going to be able to do this alone. And I think the lessons learned from Ukraine show us this in spades.
I could real quick, make one remark. I would counter. I don't think, this is going to sound terrible, I don't think the U.S. has to be the best in everything. I think we have to have a recognition that some of our partners and allies are far exceeding us in certain areas, and perhaps we should look to leverage those.
Thank you. All great points. Jennifer, if I can turn to you on this note, you know, I asked you about signaling, but I think it gets to a same theme here of lessons learned. You know, how is industry perceiving these lessons learned? How are you all learning what's going on in Ukraine versus how are we preparing for a future fight as well? I mean, you mentioned the NATO platform, you mentioned the capability coalitions. Would love your thoughts from an industry perspective on those lessons getting translated.
Certainly, I think, you know, we are doing the traditional things, which we are increasing production. We are investing in capacity. We are investing in advanced technology, AI, right, enabling us to do interoperability easier, faster, recognizing all of those things. I think the other piece, and it's been talked about here, but we need to have an entrepreneurial spirit. And one thing I will say that it's been sort of very exciting to see has been in cooperation and collaboration with other countries and with our program offices. There has been this brainstorming, this recognition that, look, necessity is the mother of invention. And so people have taken somewhat of an Apollo 13 approach of, here's all I've got. How do I make this happen? And that's been really exciting to be a part of. And we've seen that collaboration, not just across, our competimates, but also with companies in other countries. We're investing in partnerships. We're investing in co-production. And I think, again, to your point, you can't do anything alone. So it's very much about the partnership that you have. And I also think our U.S. government program offices have recognized that as well. And you see them doing very innovative things. A great example, and it's open source, people can look at it, is the Frankensam project. I mean, that's a great example of innovation and doing something that's very atypical from a traditional defense perspective. So.
No, that's great to hear. It's how do we translate this through every player in the ecosystem, because there are many. Even the think tank world, where we try to be a player in this as well. Dmytro, if I can turn to you on this, you discussed the challenges as you look at the innovation ecosystem in Ukraine and some of the challenges that might be coming down the road. And you mentioned lessons learned. Are you seeing from your perspective the willingness to formalize any kind of lessons that you're seeing with your partners, with Ukraine's partners? Are you seeing opportunities to do that in a different way or a better way from what you're seeing, what we're seeing on the battlefield versus what we're seeing over here?
Yes, that's a very good question. So many thoughts on that. There's many aspects at the lessons learned, right? At the battlefield, there is certainly a lot of lesson learned that is being discussed because, obviously when you fail, that results in catastrophic events and loss of life. And so it's just a matter of survival of whoever does lessons learned evolves and survives to see the future. We want to be careful, as we know, generals usually fight previous wars. We need to look forward, right? This all momentum is great, but what's next, right? There is an aspect of satellite communication, cyber warfare that can improve and potentially, change the playing field, the game field, into a different perspective, just like drones did, right? I think Debra mentioned air superiority, right? If Ukraine had air superiority or even air matching, it wouldn't need drones, right? But this all came out of, again, the necessity is the mother of invention, into the tactical field, but also into the more strategic, that influence the strategic aspect of things, right? So those are very important things. We also need to talk about the entrepreneurship aspect. As Mykhailo Fedorov mentioned, there are American companies who are interested in investing, and we're already partnering with some American companies who are interested in investing in the technological advancements. And those are great. We need more of that. As we know from economics, the first people who invest, yes, the risks are higher, but the payout is also higher as well, right? So again, talking about the more, partnering at the tactical level, but also on all levels, essentially, from very tactical to strategic in that respect, as well as, don't forget, in terms of sharing the technologies, Ukraine can be better at sharing technology through allowing private companies who make drones to export drones to other countries. There's a lot of interest from NATO countries to get some of that technology into their hands to train. So our organization trained over 200,000 Ukrainian defenders on use of technology, including drone operation and counter-drone technologies. And, we get requests from other countries to say, hey, can you train us? And we're like, well, priorities, But yes, there's a need in that. And then, again, investment in the human capital. So we need to make sure that the technology is not only moving to Ukraine, but also out of Ukraine and mixing, right? Because to the point of the economy aspect of things, you need to invest money to make sure you have production capacity, that you have funds to make sure that you can plan ahead essentially in that respect.
It's a great point. There's a desire to learn these things from Ukraine's partners, so we understand that. And you also brought up a word which we haven't even talked about this morning, which I feel like I spent hours talking about and thinking about, which is risk, which is a risk culture or risk aversion culture. How does that dictate how innovation comes to fruition? How does that dictate how the process goes to get it to the warfighter? We could probably spend another hour, if you all don't want to have lunch, talking about risk, but we know that lunch is waiting. But I really would like to open it up to the audience. I'm not sure if we have microphones for. Oh, we do. Okay, wonderful. I saw this gentleman right here who I have met before. It's so lovely to see you. Raise your hand before we got started, but please, if you can grab, if there's a microphone for you. Oh, I'm sorry. No, please go ahead. I didn't realize. Please.
Hello? Can you hear me? Hello?
We can hear you.
Great.
Yes.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to say great thank you very much for all the panelists. It's really insightful discussion. Thank you very much. But my question now is especially for Abigail. So my name is Andrew Smolensky. I'm the founder of Patronum Foundation, and for the last 4 years, we hear about, Ukraine changed everything. Like, we need to learn from Ukraine. Everybody praising Ukraine's bravery, technological developments and successes, all that. Everybody talking about cooperation. When I was a commander of drone reconnaissance unit in Ukraine, I heard that a lot. Now in the civil life, I still hearing the same. But what's happening in practical terms, it can be laid down into three key points, right? Direct investments from United States to investment to innovative industry of defense in Ukraine. We don't see that, right? Is there export kind of control, easy peasy kind of regulations from United States to Ukraine? No, Ukrainian startups with which we are working with, they are scared sometimes to enter American market. They say, we're going to enter, then they're going to limit our export and we will not be able to help our guys on the front lines. And I'm not even talking about strategic communications on the level of administrations right now, right? Can you comment, please, in practical terms, in real terms, does the United States really recognize, especially in DIU, do you guys recognize that you really want some of the capabilities that Ukraine have built through these 4 years and integrated into American doctrine, which is obviously concentrated heavily about Air Force and air superiority? And if yes, can you please answer why we see that, for example, in the February Congress passed a legislation that basically opening a separate DIU branch in Israel, for example, which we see it's completely different type of warfare. It's a terrorist warfare. It's not fight with Russia. It's not fight with China. It's not fight with North Korea, right? But what we don't see the same type of attitudes towards Ukraine. We see American government investing $150 million into Israel defense innovation ecosystem. We don't see the same attitude towards Ukraine. So can you explain why that happening? Is it plainly strategical, political stuff, which is not in the hands of the operational units like DIU, or is it some kind of doctrinal position of American government, of DIU, especially in the context of Ukraine, obviously? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your question. Abigail.
Sure. Yep. Great question. I can only address a piece of it, speaking from the DIU perspective. So for those of you who had seen a previous agenda, you would have seen the name Mark Lennon as the panelist. I am standing in for Mark. Mark was just in Kiev. So we are routinely sending DIU personnel over there to exchange in conversations to understand how we can apply some of the lessons learned that we have talked about here in the United States, also trying to understand some of the concerns that you raised and what influence that we may be able to have from our position as a principal staff assistant to the Secretary of Defense, representing the commercial sector. We, as I mentioned, have a couple of Ukrainian drone companies on contract already. We recognize that the commercial sector owns their commercial capability. So hopefully any other Ukrainian firm who is interested in applying for a DIU CSO can understand that they retain all rights to their intellectual property. The capability they are developing for the commercial market or for any other defense market resides with them. It is only the piece of tech that is modified to fit the U.S. needs that would then be subject to any regulation restrictions. I cannot speak to our Congress and the decisions that they make and the interests that they have. All I can say is that's a suggested amendment. It's not yet in the Authorization Act. And so it still has to go through the floor and go through all the approvals in order to tell us that that is what we must do. So thank you very much for the question, and hopefully I've answered you.
Thank you so much for the answer here. I will say, as someone who spent many years working in Congress, Abigail's totally right. We'll see what shakes out of the National Defense Authorization Act. But I think it does go to the point of how do we formalize some of these relationships and partnerships that make it a given in legislation, make it a given in funding and resources to allow this work to happen. So again, thank you so much for the question. Let me turn to the gentleman in the back. Introduce yourself, please, and go ahead.
Hello, my name is Valery Yakovenko. I'm the founder of the Drone UA group of companies. Back in Ukraine, we have a large group of engineers making miracles every single day. Here in the United States, we are investing in the building up the same ecosystem that we have built in Ukraine so far. There is a question regarding the understanding of the role of Ukrainians, because right now the industry of the robotics applications in Ukraine grown up so fast, so it became the biggest in the planet. No one on this planet manufactures more drones than Ukraine does. There is a fact that some middle-sized companies manufacture more drones than the whole NATO countries altogether, and this is done just by one company. The smallest company in Ukraine manufacturing drones is the biggest than any possible competitor in the United States. Sorry for some kind of tough stuff. However, there are differences in understanding of the role of Ukrainians. Ukrainians are not asking actually for the investments from the United States. Ukrainians are ready to invest. Ukrainians are ready to open manufacturing facilities here in the United States, because the United States is a perfect launchpad to go global. The United States is a perfect market for them to fit here. And we are opening jobs. We are bringing technologies and sharing them. We are not stealing them. We are sharing Ukrainian technologies. From this perspective, for this understanding, we have a huge number of possible intermediaries that are attacking us every single day, asking, give us something, we want to sell it to DOD. Give us something, we will register you somewhere else. There is a huge number of different intermediaries, but Ukrainians not easy accessible for the direct relations with DOD and with other implementing partners or agencies or administrations. So it is a question when it will be changed, when the procurement system will allow Ukrainian businesses that are opening here in the United States, manufacturing equipment here in the United States, to be capable to become and to boost up this huge robotic ecosystem that is need to be rebuilt from scratch here in the US.
Thank you so much for the question. How do we fix procurement in the U.S.? That is a whole other session.
Ukrainians to DOD, Ukrainians
Understood.
innovations, not only for the security, but for other industries as well.
Understood. Thank you so much for the question. No, absolutely. Abigail, Jennifer, others would like to weigh in on this. Any thoughts on how do we tackle the intermediary challenge and really get this technology stateside?
Jennifer, I'd be interested in your perspective on this. I think that I am not surprised that there are a lot of intermediaries reaching out. They are eager for the business with the Defense Department. They're eager to win, right? I think the pathways exist They are dirt pathways. They are not yet paved. They are not yet with ginormous cones directing you to say, here, come this way. But there are pathways, and I think that we can be doing a better job of ensuring that information is distributed more broadly and widely known, of how to engage as a non-U.S. entity within our marketplace. I've mentioned we have Ukrainian companies on contract already. We have made 28 awards to international companies. Many or some of them do not have headquarters in the United States or an office in the United States. We very much believe that we go to where the technology is the best. And so if a company applies and they are not based in the United States and they do not have adversarial investment, et cetera, we will make the award. And then that will set that company on a path for a FAR-based contract in our system. So it's not an easy path, but like I said, it's there in dirt, not yet paved.
Thank you.
I'll catch you later. First of all, actually, as a business development person, I'd love your card and information. We do have an advanced technology group. We do have a global trade organization, and we do constantly take a look at innovative capabilities and technologies that would make sense for the strategies and direction of our organization. It's not fast. And I say that, I came into the defense industry 22 years ago, and when people said to me, it's not like commercial, I had no idea what they were talking about. It is much slower. But that being said, there are processes and ways to get things forward. And I think if you find the right organization where the focus is how can we get to yes versus how do we start with no, then I think you can find ways. So we certainly have to go through the due diligence process that the government has for export, for global trade, for due diligence, and those are the things we would still have to do, but absolutely.
Thank you so much for that. I think that's a wonderful note to end on. How do we get to yes? Which is always what we need to be focused on. We have run out of time. I have been given the old, we're at an hour, lunch is waiting for you all. Any additional questions, I welcome you to come up and talk to the panelists after the panel. If you wouldn't mind giving a round of applause to our wonderful panel this morning.